Welcome back, everyone. This is actually the third installment of a three-part series that I'm doing to answer the common question that I get on Instagram and sometimes here on YouTube, and that is, what is the power setting of the light that I'm using? And in part one, I went over all the variables that go into whether or not that number can be used in order to get a correct exposure. Then in part two, I talked about how to get a correct exposure, so I would really suggest that you watch those two videos. In this video today, I'm going to talk about how to set up your camera and where to place your lights so that you can photograph with intent and get the mood and look that you're going for. So of course, people ask me what the power setting is of the light all the time, and it's really the wrong question to be asking, or the wrong thing to be obsessed about. The main thing to worry about is, what is the f-stop on our camera? That to me is the most important setting that we're using when we're taking a picture. The f-stop determines how much of your shot is in focus. So if you have a very fast prime lens, like an 85-1.2 or a 28-70 f2, you can shoot wide open at f1.2 or f2, and you can take shots with really blurry backgrounds. It's a look. People call it bokeh-licious. It does look good. It's a great way to photograph when you're outside because there could be a lot of distracting elements and you just want to eliminate those. So that's why you might shoot wide open. Or you might be in the studio and you might choose to shoot at 5.6 or f8 because most of the time with professional lenses, those are the sharpest f-stops. Or maybe you're photographing on a set with a lot of depth in it and you want props in focus in the background, or you're using a hand-painted backdrop. You might choose to shoot at f8 or f11 in order to get those details. Maybe you're shooting a headshot and you're photographing a person for a skincare campaign, or what I often will do is something to do with the hair industry. That's why I'm shooting my close-ups a lot of the time in my paid work. And so I will shoot those at f11 or f16 because I want to get all of the head sharp and in focus with my 85mm lens, because the haircut is the subject. Or maybe you're photographing jewelry and you're going to photograph your person at f16 because that's what you need in order to get all of the jewelry in focus and their eyes. So there are a number of reasons why we would choose our f-stop, but the f-stop is going to be very important when it comes to taking the type of picture that we want to take. Now, if you're not photographing people, there are still going to be times where you're going to want to shoot wide open or you're going to want to stop down. And so knowing how our aperture affects our pictures is very important when setting up the camera and thinking about how we want our shot to look. Now, once we've selected our f-stop, we're probably going to have to select our shutter speed. If we're photographing outdoors or we're trying to blend some available light, ambient light in the room with a flash or a continuous light, then we're probably, well, let me step that back. If we're using flash and we're trying to photograph outdoors and augment the sun, or we're indoors and we're trying to augment ambient light with flash, we're probably going to choose a shutter speed that will make it so that our background is correctly exposed. If we're using continuous lights or we're using sunlight, we're going to have to set our shutter speed in order to get a correct exposure on our person. So that would be a factor. If we're photographing in the studio, then we're probably going to shoot at our camera's sync speed. And for most of you, that's going to be a 1/200th or a 1/250th of a second. This is the maximum or fastest shutter speed that our camera can communicate with our flashes and have them fire in a very efficient way. This isn't something called high-speed sync. That's something that would happen if we were probably outdoors or trying to stop motion, and that's when we increase our shutter speed past our sync speed. But if you want a deep dive on high-speed sync, I'll link to a video that's all about that. The next thing that we're going to set up on our camera is our ISO. And our ISO is simply the sensitivity of our sensor to light. The lower the ISO is, the higher the image quality will be. You will get more dynamic range and you will get less noise. Now, on the most modern cameras, noise isn't so much of a factor. When we were shooting film, ISO speed was crazy how much of a difference there was between 100 and 400. So, but in digital, there is a difference in dynamic range, which is the amount of data that you are recording from dark to light. And so in order to maximize dynamic range, you want to keep that ISO low in order to get the most dynamic range. But what you don't want to do is you don't want to have your ISO be so low that it causes you to sacrifice the f-stop that you need, or you have it be so low that it causes you to sacrifice the shutter speed that you need. So let's say that there's two different scenarios here and how these camera settings affect our flash settings. So let's say that we are photographing indoors and we are trying to augment the available light that's in the background. Let's say we're photographing a business headshot and we have the office as our background. And it's not a lot of sunlight coming through the window. It's just the overhead lighting or however it is, or it's gray and cloudy outside and the windows are tinted, but it's not a lot of light that's in that space. So we might shoot at 1/100th of a second at f2, and we might shoot at 400 ISO. Well, in that scenario, when we add a flash to light the person, and we're using, let's say, a 3-foot softbox, our power on our flash might be at the minimum power, or very, very, very low. So that is a factor. If we were photographing that jewelry shot in the studio and we were using a large softbox, well, the large softbox is going to take a lot of light in order to fill it and have the light come bounce around, go everywhere, and come out. So large softboxes soak up a lot of light. We're also going to shoot at f16. So because we need that depth of field, we're probably going to shoot at 1/200th of a second. Well, in that scenario, our flash power might be all the way up at, let's say, 500 watt seconds. And we might be shooting at 100 ISO, or we might have to shoot at 200 or 400 ISO. But that's what we're going to have to do in order to make that scenario work. So you can see how the f-stop that we choose and the artistic intent that we have changes how we set up our camera, and it also changes the amount of electricity, the amount of watt seconds or energy, well, it is battery power in some cases, that we're using on our flash units in order to light our scene. It's going to be different in some scenarios and different in others. And you could have the light at the exact same distance, and depending on your camera settings and your intent, you could have vastly different settings. So that is a factor and something to consider. The next thing I want to talk about is where we place our lights. So if we're going for a very moody image, that camera, the light angle is going to be off axis, is what we call it. So on axis would be if the light was directly in front of me right now over the camera, it would be lighting my face. It would be creating a lighting pattern that's called paramount. But we might move it slightly off and it would be creating a lighting pattern called loop lighting. That's what's happening right now. Or we might move it over further and it could be creating Rembrandt lighting on my face. Or we could move it even further and it could be creating split lighting, because that's the type of lighting pattern that we want to go for, because we want it to be super moody. Or maybe we have it in the butterfly position because we want it to be super bright and airy, and we want to have that sort of like actor headshot that looks like it was photographed in front of a window. Or maybe we've got it in the loop lighting position too, because we want to take a picture of an older subject for their business headshot. And so that's why we've got that there. But maybe we're photographing a model in a full body fashion image. Maybe we put it in the Rembrandt position, which is over here. So there are all sorts of places that we can put our light in order to get the look that we're going for. And I have a video that's all about the 9 lighting patterns that you'll encounter in portrait photography. And I'll link to that so that you can check it out as well. But just know that where we place our light affects the mood in the shot. If we're using multiple lights, like maybe we're adding a hair light or an edge light, if you will. I have an edge light over each shoulder here coming down. That's what's causing the haze in the top corners. If we're using those are probably going to be dimmer than the light coming from the front because we just want to add a little accent here in order to make the person more three-dimensional and have them pop. So the power setting we use for each of these lights is going to affect the mood as well. If I want it to look like, instead of that being an ambient light and I want it to look like it's daytime here instead of nighttime, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to have that light turned up a lot higher, because when we're outside during the day, the sun comes in usually into our shots and it's really bright. And so I would have that kicker pretend that it's the sun, and I would use a very small hard light source in order to make that happen. And I would keep it to be maybe the same exposure on the back of my head as the light that's hitting the front of my head. So that is how our light power ratings, or the relationship between them, might equal a different mood in different scenarios. So to wrap up the entire series, when people ask me what the power setting is of my flash unit, I think for the most part, they're probably asking the wrong question, because they fundamentally don't understand how everything plays together. So I wanted to create this video for you so that you can, or this video series for you, so that you could better understand how everything relates to everything else. So that way you can improve your photography and photograph with intent and think about the things that are going into that final image. It's not just the camera settings and the light setting. There are so many more things. And so we went over how the distance matters, the modifier matters, how things are going to be different from one model of flash to the other model of the flash. Some are going to be more efficient, some are going to be less efficient, how that affects our light. We talked about how skin tone affects light and how the size of the room can affect the light. And when we talked about the exposure, we talked about all the different ways you could get that exposure. But when we did that, we talked about what it looks like when the main light is underexposed or when the hair light is overexposed. And we talked about how to nail that exposure with a gray card or a light meter, and how the light meter reading is actually the data point that's most important aside from the camera settings, because the light meter reading is actually information that you can use in order to recreate the same pictures. And that's why in all of my lighting handbooks, I put light meter readings, because that is the only honest way that I can share with you the lighting setup and how you can recreate it. Because if you have that information, then you can get vaguely the same shot, even if you have a different modifier or a different light model, or you choose a different aperture. So I hope this all helped and made sense and better explains why it is when somebody asks me that question of what the power is of my light, that I sometimes kind of sit back and don't really want to answer, because the answer is so long and the topic is so complicated for the most part. And sometimes I've actually told people I don't write that down, and they get mad at me because somehow I've done something wrong. But as you can see, that number isn't so important. What's really important, as with everything, is your intent and the type of pictures that you want to create. And the best way for you to get better at photography is to practice. So I encourage you to do that. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to check out the gear that I'm using, I will link to it below. If you could please like, subscribe, and sign up for the bell too, I would really appreciate it. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.